Okay, welcome back. I'm Stasia Bliss. We are reading The Biology of Kundalini by Jana Dixon, Exploring the Fire of Life. If you're with me in the book, we're on page 22, the preparation. So we're doing a little reading and dialogue throughout. I think this is just one of the most important things that we can be reading right now as far as identifying our own and our loved ones' transformation, metamorphosis process into their divine nature, as we've been speaking about, and how to look for that, how to notice it's happening, and how to support that process. So here we go. We're just going to dive right in. Preparation. She puts a quote here. It says, "Following the way of yoga, a man must reach the state of samadhi, that is, of ecstasy or enlightenment, in which alone truth can be understood." That's coming from Pensky, A New Model for the Universe from 1997. She says, "Perhaps the main caution that I have discovered through my own experiences and in my research is that if you set your chemistry toward a hot burn without also providing the resources for structural strength, detoxification, and oxidation inflammation protection, then, depending on your constitution, a Kundalini awakening could age the body faster and might lead to cancer in extreme cases, could also cause organ failure." So she's saying you definitely don't want to push yourself into this and obtain like a hot burn, which is just like a huge influx of Kundalini. Like some people are really kind of go-getters and are like, let's just do it, give it to me, like give me the whole method or whatever. And I highly caution against that. A story I have from yoga school at the ashram in Bihar that I attended, you could go in the library there and they have the most in-depth spiritual library anywhere on the planet, and people would fly from all over to look at that. But as students, the level we were studying at the time, I wasn't allowed to look at certain things. And at the time I thought it was stupid. You know, I read something in one of my books and I wanted to know the reference. I wanted to see what they were talking about. And I went to the desk to ask, and the Swami was like, no, like knowing the process I was in at the time, knowing the stage of the awakening process I was in. And I was almost like, come on, like I can just find it myself. And she said, some people have left here in ambulances to a mental ward for like taking on too much too fast. And at the time, I had no idea what she was talking about. I did not understand the stages of the awakening process, and I was still fairly early on. So this is why she said, depending on your constitution, your structural strength, how much detoxification you've had, and the oxidation inflammation process. So the more you're exposed to life force energy, sometimes if you don't have the right backup hormones, resources, mental attitude, then it acts more like an inflammatory state, like your body is inflaming to protect itself from information it cannot process, which can cause you to like age faster or develop some other dis-ease and the body's attempt to pull you back down into like a three-dimensional. She says, "This is why I stress the need for preparation, meta-adaptation, and most importantly, to avoid the lust of chasing the dragon through excessively stimulating substances, practices, and experiences." Some people get that way with plant medicines, chasing the dragon, and it's a very intense study to go that way, and it can also have similar results of a burnout. She says, "There's a need for each of us to modulate and moderate our flame according to our changing ability for meta-adaptation within body, mind, soul, and community." So it's good to know that this change will happen, but you're not trying to rush it on and you're not trying to make it happen faster. It's like kids who try to grow up too fast, little girls wearing high heels and makeup and, trying to act that way is premature to the process. It eventually will happen, but that can get you into trouble in the first puberty as well if you act too grown up too fast. Our modern cultural conditions, such as a sedentary lifestyle, removal from nature, and cooked clogging diets, are not conducive to a Kundalini flow or awakening. And that might be an exception to, like, Ayurvedic food is cooked, but she's saying cooked clogging. So like overly cooked, tamasic foods that are really like cause inertia and stagnation in the body. This alchemy, no, it says this means that when we do pop, it tends to be explosive rather than an ongoing thread of alchemy through our lifetime. So if you've clogged up the passageway and it's trying to wake you up, eventually it will wake you up, but it's also going to push out all of that junk. And that is the explosiveness of that. It's like all of that backed up in the system, like a clogged pipe. She says, still, I don't think it should be the aim of spiritual practice like yoga and meditation to have a nice, smooth, calm awakening. Safe growth is translation, not transformation. It is the machination of the ego to want to control the process of evolution, either through balance or through exaggeration of the extremes. Spiritual practice, however, can tend to tame the ego's resistance to the process so that less friction and damage to the organism occurs, thereby making the metamorphic process more thorough and enduring. So it is funny to say, you know, you can manage your life force, even though that is what I talk about as far as my practice, life force management. That just really means that I'm like I was going to say like a crash test doll, but like a stunt man. I can't do it for you, but I'm definitely going to be there like with the crash test dummy. Like as you go through your fall and crash, that I'm just going to be like, here we are, you're in it. This is where you're going to be now. There's no way to avoid or even pretend to mitigate or negate the effects of Kundalini. Like that isn't my job at all. Yoga can help you also just have a place to go when you're cracking. So can meditation. Like that's the point, not to stop it or to make it like a gentle, moderate awakening. That's naive to think that that is what's happening, because you literally are going through a massive transformation. So she's saying it's the ego that thinks you can tame it, right? She says, funny thing was in 2000 on arriving in Boulder, I was heading for the major blast and I was spontaneously doing a Kundalini practice and I didn't know it at the time. Some of the things I was doing daily were meditation on iron rocks. Excuse me, I've got like a little tickle. Meditation on iron rocks at sunset. Alternatively, jumping in a cold stream and then putting hot rocks on my body. Juicing, running in the hills, and hanging. So similarly, I didn't know how I was stimulating my life force by like sun gazing on the beach in India, being outside all the time, not looking at clocks, walking barefoot, running with my eyes closed, being very like free with my body. Like a lot of that was also contributing factors to my awakening process. She says, if I didn't do these things, chances are I wouldn't have popped so richly. And me too. We have to prepare ourselves to meet the beloved. This is the essential work of elevating the vehicle to receive the self, the divine self. It is the unusual nature and intensity of metamorphosis which forces respect, awareness, awe, and faith. Definitely, the unusual nature and intensity which forces respect. Fear and panic is unavoidable with the hyperactivation of the sympathetic nervous system and the unknown quality of what is happening and what's going on. But in the end, passing through this fear leaves one with such an altered psychology and a deeper perspective that allows one distance from the collective fear. So it's purposeful. Only then do we have any power to dispel consensus fear and increase love in the world, for we become karma-eating machines, offering cellular forgiveness. This is the gift of bio-maturity that constitutes the Christ. So this is what it means to Christ oneself, to actually plunge oneself into the depths of the sorrow, into this massive metamorphosis change that completely breaks you down and makes you feel everything truly. and our sympathetic nervous system feels it, acts, responds to it. We dump the hormones, we experience the full terror or the fear, and that is actually, when we get through that for ourselves, that's how we can look at the collective and have compassion for them, and then remove barriers that others haven't had to go through or haven't gone through with awareness. It does metamorphosize the entire human field, and that's what the man Jesus the Christ did. The Christed being Jesus went through his spiritual awakening and metamorphosis, transformed his awareness and his physical body, went through his Kundalini awakening, changed his biology, and made a pattern, did it consciously, said, hey, this is what I'm doing this for you too, because there's not very many of you guys doing a Kundalini awakening right now, so let me do it on the planet and go through the whole cycle of it. Whether rocky or calm, one always has the awakening specifically designed for one's own needs. Each individual is different. Some nuts are harder to crack than others, and so take more force or unusual mechanisms to open. Kundalini herself will guide the way if we listen intently to be informed from within and hold lightly to our shoulds and our known concepts. During Gopi Krishna's major cycle, now this is another Kundalini book that you can read, authored by Gopi Krishna, had just like a psychotic sort of experience. During his major cycle, he was having severe problems with extreme energy, aberrant mental states, heat, fear, and pain. Although there was very little help available for him, even in India at the time, someone did tell him that if the energy goes up the right sympathetic trunk, Pingala, the right side, that his could result in the symptoms he was experiencing and possibly end in death. So he doesn't want Kundalini only to come up this side. So he needed to do practices to balance that out. So he was told that. During the height of his suffering, he had the intuition to concentrate on directing the current up the central channel of the spine. That's really where meditation comes in. After success at doing this, his torturous symptoms abated and he entered a more gentle, blissful, illuminated awakening, which lasted the rest of his life. So he was lucky to have someone tell him that, because if it's diverted one side or another or more, that will affect you negatively. Those who have a history of child abuse, neglect of dysfunction, tend to have more catastrophic awakenings because their systems are built for repression and disassociation. So if you're already like suppressing something huge and maybe violent in your youth, that Kundalini awakening will put you face to face with those feelings again. She says it's not always the case, but it is a pattern. One can imagine that the more loving touch and self-validation that a child receives, the more efficiently wired is their nervous system, and the fewer psychosomatic and emotional blocks they will have. But consciousness will out no matter what is the formative structure. So consciousness is going to sweep it all away anyway and give you a new. It just may be easier for some than others based on childhood. The nature of one's individual awakening not only depends on one's past history, but also determined by one's future history. That is, what one is to become and experience is already at play in one's present. So she's suggesting a form of destiny, informing us trans-temporally in ways the rational mind can't perceive. So it's like that ripple that's coming back towards you from your future. The tree is already inherent in the seed. The future magnetically draws us toward it, almost as though the karma of the future was enacted on the present. And there is that butterfly effect that is forward and back. It seems like the more open, surrendered, and evolved one is, the more challenge one is faced with in incarnating one's soul, because there's more at stake for the person of depth to be brought to their creative climax, as the species as an entirety evolves through the successful realization of these outstanding individuals. So it is resting, like the collective evolves when individuals are outstanding and evolve. So this is so important as new earth leaders to step into your fear spots and claim who you are. This is for myself too. Claim your space in reality, because that evolves humanity as a collective when we do so. So that also means there's a faded sort of wave from the future. It reminds me of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and his future selves. The future of humanity is at stake. And so they send back to the past self, right? So that the future self maintains its integrity, that the course is not changed in the past. And we know time is an illusion anyway, right? Here's the rub. The more spiritual preparation one does, the larger the flow of Kundalini coursing through one. Traditional spiritual practices were developed to both bring on an awakening, to give strength to one, and skills for navigating the awakening, okay, strength and skills, and to substantiate the awakening in life and his relationship to the world. So the more one is doing, there is the preparation, to bring it on, but then also to like help you through it, and then to take you further than that. That's how much is bottled up in this, right? And the more preparation that you do, the more you're helping the whole big picture. Pranothana is Sanskrit for intensified, uplifted life energy. Pranothana. I find it endlessly ironic that the hardest thing we will ever have to face in life is the Pranothana of ourself, the intensified, uplifted life force of ourself, our own Pranothana. Fortunately, now with modern science, we can largely understand the unusual and disturbing symptoms, raise our homeostasis, coping ability, and avoid a lot of the dangers posed by radically increased life force. So thanks to our modern advances, although they had traditional medicines and intuitive wisdom, the amazing realizers of the past did not have the comfort of scientific rationality by which to understand and accept what was happening to them. After several episodes of samadhi, this intense awakening, Ramakrishna told his disciples that he actually feared that he would no longer be able to look after himself. Because the old has to die before the new emerges, there will always be this feeling of being completely out of our depth during some leg of the journey, and that means there's a death process going on. However, through rationale, understanding, self-inquiry, and reassurance from the experience of others, we can greatly reduce our secondary stress, resistance, and negative coping mechanisms, such that we can learn to flow with the evolutionary force rather than fighting it. And this is why coaches are so important and why I do what I do, because I know I'm constantly have to remind myself of the process I'm going through. And I've learned to do that effectively, and I have enough resources and practices that now I'm like, hey, it'd be stupid if I didn't offer this to other people too. So that is my rationale around helping, turn around and help the next one behind you. Our attitude toward being out of our depth and toward the death of the old and how well we can accept the great unknown will largely determine how well we weather our Kundalini journey. If we fight with Kundalini, it will harm us. But if we learn the cosmic way of metamorphosis and fall into sublime relationship with it, trusting the very force of the power itself, it will transform our frog self into our royal being. So the yogic traditions that were developed in response to this evolutionary urge that Kundalini is several branches, and this is just a few of them. But we have Raja Yoga, which is a development of consciousness, also called King of Yoga. Jnana Yoga, which is refinement of knowledge or self-exploration. Karma Yoga, which is the yoga of right action or selfless service. Hatha Yoga, the power of the body to balance the poles. Bhakti Yoga, right spiritual action, devotion, and surrender. So those are all some of the paths. There's also strictly Kundalini Yoga, Laya Yoga, Mantra Yoga, many other ways that you could go about this. This is some simple. So all of us need to develop and integrate these various sides of ourselves, she says, to support the positive awakening. However, we will likely be drawn more toward one or another. So she is saying of these 5, we definitely need to develop our consciousness, our knowledge, what right actions are, some kind of power over our body, hatha yoga, and devotion. That we all need that, but we might be more one of those than the other. Of course, this rounded development is none other than taking care of the 3 domains of being. She's saying, so the I, the we, and the it. Okay, those 3 domains, which are outlined throughout Ken Wilber's work. He gives integral practice suggestions in integral psychology. So she gives a lot of information from him in here. That's on page 24 of this book. So integral lifestyle is essential to balance body, brain functions, emotions, intellect, and spirit. If we do not apply ourselves to developing our lives integrally, then we tend to narrow our focus and become habitually lopsided very fast. So it's very good to balance yourself out. It says any self-realization our awakening has given us is undermined by a lack of balance foundation in our lives. So if we've definitely found ourselves more in one realm, it's good to develop other realms so that Kundalini can continue to branch us out and make us more well-rounded. The amplified energies and awareness of awakening will tend to exaggerate the insufficiencies in our lifestyle and being, making it easier to see where we need to apply ourselves. So, for example, if you are very spiritual and you're applying yourself very spiritually, then you will tend to notice that area grows and like other areas become lopsided, like maybe your finances don't do so good, or you're not doing good in other relations, or that sort of thing. So, or if you're very good at finances, you will see where maybe you're not doing as great in your spirituality. Or if you're really good with friendships, you might, you'll see where your lopsidedness is. Maybe you're not as good going within if you're good with friends, and vice versa. So that urges you to, as you raise your life force, as you become more aware, to say, okay, I need to become more well-rounded. So if I'm doing this, I need to also put focus over here where I'm showing lack. So that's good. During a Kundalini awakening, we are at a lifetime peak in our pituitary potency. So this raises our center of being to the psychic level through which we have access to a vastly higher vision and taste of reality. While at that level, we cannot fit our larger being down into the consensus flatline reality. Thus, when in this higher operational mode, we become acquainted with our essential aloneness. So that's also part of it, and why some people tend to isolate during their awakening, because they're really realizing, oh my gosh, there really is only me. In one sense, there really is only aloneness. And that can be very difficult when you realize everyone's sort of like a reflection of you, an aspect of the one, showing you just what you're putting out. That can be very confronting. As well as, the endocrine glands, spleen, liver, stomach, brain, and heart brain are radically important to the metamorphosis process. So we can assume that overutilization of reserves in liver and spleen, combined with exhaustion of neurotransmitters, hormones, enzymes, plus the buildup of metabolites, are the cause of classic burnout effects. So we are getting this peak. Pituitary hormones get a peak and then they drop off. That can make us go into a slump. That can make us feel like we suddenly aren't psychic anymore, where we were psychic or feeling psychic. Our inner navigation and motivation can go to an all-time high and then a low. Feeling attraction to others or attractive to others could also sway our life purpose, meaning, drive, zest, etc. So we get crusted, or we get to the peak of all those things during the height, and then we sometimes can forget the power of our visions when that energy drops down and we feel like the low thing. So one thing we must be aware of during the heights of our psychic peak as well, in the exhaustion phase, we might be less psychic than we were prior to awakening. So here you are before awakening, you don't really feel psychic at all. You have a peak and now you're really super psychic. Like for a while, I think I told you I was writing poems, just literally opening the dictionary and it was just flowing out of me, or I was hearing other people's thoughts in my mind while I was in restaurants, and I would it was kind of freaky. I thought, this is like a little bit freaky and I'm gonna go crazy if I feel this all the time. So that was during a peak of mine. And then after the peak, I dropped more to like here. So here's how I was before. Kundalini peak made me feel this psychic, and then I was this psychic after that. So I was more psychic than before, but not as psychic as during that peak. So that is like a little bit of a downer during that when that happens. But she's saying, remember, you've gone up a level. As a culture, when we learn to manage Kundalini without excessive organic damage, like to our organs, then we should be able to grow in a fashion that prevents blowback, slumps in our functioning. So we should all anticipate and be psychologically prepared for a loss of psychic ability so that we don't become soul sick at our apparent loss of depth. You know, integral practices help us to integrate. So we're like doing things to strengthen our whole core nature and accept all parts of ourself can really help. Says this will deepen our integration and integrity of our hormonal base so that when an awakening occurs, we can use the peaking energies and hormones to productive effect rather than have them wasted in resistance, dysfunction, and coping. Okay, so integral practices will permanently up our baseline pituitary hormone level so we don't fall as much after. Okay. So to illustrate the need for preparation, she quotes from Alpensky's A New Model of the Universe, and she says this: Hatha Yoga prepares the physical body of man to bear all the hardship connected with the functioning in him of the higher psychic forces, higher consciousness, will, intense emotions, etc. These forces do not function in ordinary man. Their awakening and development produce a terrific strain and pressure on the physical body. And if the body is not trained and prepared by special exercises, if it is in the usual sickly condition, it is unable to withstand this pressure and cannot keep up with the unusually intensive work of the organs of perception and consciousness, which is inevitably connected with the development of the higher forces and possibilities of man. In order to enable the heart, brain, and the nervous system, and also the other organs, the role of which in the psychic life of man is little, if at all, known to the Western science, to bear the pressure of new functions, the whole body must be well balanced, harmonized, purified, put in order, and prepared for the new and tremendously hard work that awaits it. So this is important and maybe a good place to stop in this chapter. We're almost to the end of the preparation, but I don't like to go too much more than this long. Well, it's really just one more page, 1.5 more pages. But let's just say like preparation helps so you don't blow out, you know, because your organs and glands and everything are getting pressurized. And if you're not prepared ahead of time and you're just kind of like base level anyway, it's going to knock you out. And then you will get sick, like you will get cancer or something. And I'm not saying that to your subconscious mind. I'm just saying be prepared. You know, it's up to us to change our minds about that, not let somebody tell us, but that's more of a possibility. So what is the motive of the need to kindle Kundalini? Why would anyone do that? She says, I question the soundness of trying to initiate Kundalini via yoga practices. I think just to have a yoga meditation practice for its own sake is the correct way to go about it. In my experience, Kundalini sparks up spontaneously and in the course of one's life through interplay of stress and release, pain and pleasure, trauma and achievement. To go after Kundalini is like going after an orgasm for its own sake. It's mental masturbation. Saying that, however, I think that only the raising of Kundalini can free us from the pain body, neurosis, trauma, and miasms of past history. She is saying, even though you shouldn't chase it, I do think that only the raising of Kundalini can free us from the pain body, neurosis, trauma, and miasms of past history that we have recorded in our tissue. So even though you shouldn't chase it, when it does happen, that's what it does. She says, we can never know what Kundalini is like until it sparks up in our unbalanced Western body. The fire is going to pretty much dismantle our existing life. Really, dismantle. So if you haven't been dismantled yet, then maybe your Kundalini has not gone. So this is where the preparation is good. You have to be spiritually advanced or supported in order to keep up productivity and function during the height of the flame. So a coach can really help you get through it and function. If you don't have a coach, it's highly unlikely unless you are an adept from another life and that just flips on in you. Everyone's going to get some downtime, some crisis, some death. This is unavoidable during a full-on awakening. Yet, to be afraid of Kundalini only amplifies the danger, for it's like being afraid of one's own soul. Realizing that Kundalini is the very process of incarnation itself, we can devote the very best of ourselves to learning all that we can and respecting the process with the same devotion we would apply to God. A triumphant, successful Kundalini awakening is reliant on our potential to surrender to illumination, our self, and love. And I highlighted this. The adventure of self-discovery takes us to our edge, puts us in various life and death situations that quicken our spiritual metabolism. Through adventure, we evolve by facing challenges, and so real life skills are learned. We have to face them or we don't develop these skills. We learn by growing and living out our hero's journey. We discover the characters, the heroes, the anti-heroes that are within ourselves. How does spiritual practice fit into the hero's journey and the making of the soul? Well, spiritual practice won't make the soul. Only the hero's journey will. However, practice will prepare us and give us resources for the journey. At times, a left brain methodical approach might be what's needed to build strength, energy, and hope, kind of like build one's inner resources and the journey will come. Spiritual practice helps us maintain our core and ballast as we are going on our adventure, but that's not the adventure itself. Our adventure is nothing other than following our muse. Of course, it's helpful to have a guide, friends on the path, but if one wants to be an independent researcher, she says you need to do it alone, for the amount of misinformation and distraction is infinite out there. Also, through having to guide oneself, one finds the inner guide whom is infinitely intelligent. If we feel the need to rely on outside sources, we may remain dependent instead of discovering the source within. The progression of maturity goes dependent, self-survival, self-actualization. So the more we fail and have to pull ourselves up, the further we get in the process of self-actualization. The beauty of having a teacher or master is that through state resonance, we can stabilize faster or have less secondary symptoms and fears. So that's the benefit of the teacher or master or guru or coach, is just state resonance. So when they're at a new resonance and you tune in with them, you go to that new resonance and it just keeps going up in state resonance. So it's easier. It's just like stepping up together, and that's all it is. For an investigator such as myself, I had to go it alone. It was my duty and consciousness, for then I can bring new riches to the world. That's kind of how I feel about myself sometimes too, that I'm going it alone in many ways. Meditation leads to balancing the neuronal activity of left and right hemispheres, overall brain syncopation, balances sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, reduces stress hormone cortisol and adrenaline to provide a deeper rest, relaxation, and recovery period. That's all meditation. The inhibiting neurotransmitter GABA increases in the blood during meditation. Regular meditation will permanently reduce the baseline activation of hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, okay? permanently reduce baseline activation. So no more is it if you're meditating regularly. Some of the factors that play into meditation's beneficial effects are perhaps the magnetization of the blood and the economy of enzyme use, which really speeds up during meditation. It probably leads to growth of neurons, increased dendrite connections, regeneration of receptor sites, conservation of neurotransmitters, plasticity of brain function, hence enhancing learning and memory, and not to mention optimization of the hormonal system through maximizing the health of the pituitary gland. That's a big deal. Also, with increased ionization of the cerebral spinal fluid, the action potentials of the nerves are stronger. Thus, the body is able to substantiate the structure of the higher self, essentially incarnating a deeper, more powerful experience for you. So when we're in meditation, we are doing all of that. So it's like amplifying your neurology so that the governing host, which is you, has more conscious control over the body-mind. Only that which is made conscious can be dropped. So we're on the last little bit here. I'll just go ahead. She says, the way I see it is meditation reduces friction, strengthens, detoxifies, regenerates. So for meditation, with the balancing of the autonomic nervous system, there's a removal of excess energy from the reptilian defense system, thus allowing brain functions to become more contemporary rather than ruled by past trauma and reptilian mechanisms. This obviously gives us more prefrontal control over our amygdala, our fear center, the limbic brain, and this could be described as a maturing or an enlightenment of the mind. Thus, new energy and consciousness is made available for higher human capacities rather than being wasted in reactive animistic responses to our environment and autonomic coping mechanisms to the stress and traumas of life. So if we're not doing that fight or flight all the time, then we are evolved. We have evolved our mind. The orbital frontal regulation that our mother originally provided, to the degree that she engaged us in primal mothering, is now taken over by meditation and spiritual practices in the individual. Is Kundalini a divine or God energy, she asks? Basically, it is love, she says. That's the easiest way to describe it, is what Joseph Chilton Pearce calls the intelligence of the heart, and the Teilhard Chardin sees as the next revolution in harnessing the forces of the universe. It is the intelligence within the atoms, cells, organ, brain, organism, lit up, integrated, resonant with love energy. It has the bliss component that anestheses former structures so the larger order can transform the being. It is what we mythic humans have tended to call God, and all the various names of God. You could say it is the butterfly self emerging from the cocoon of the conditioned self, a socialized being into a universal being, born unto himself. This miraculous force is truly the most phenomenal process. Due to the nature of the egoic armor we've built in response to our non-enlightened culture, it takes an enormous amount of energy to open and receive our higher selves. It is the spirit in nature that calls us toward awakening. It is nature that initiates us. It is nature that eases the burdens of awakening. It is nature that allows our awakening to be successful. And it is nature that gives us the power to extend our awakening into the world. It takes an enormous amount of oxygen to give birth to ourselves. So exercise and breathe in nature every day. The more you do so, the more nature will be your ally. We want nature to work for us and with us and not against us. Therefore, we must comply with nature's mandate and thus have the power of creation on our side. In the words of Sir Francis Bacon, and this is the final words of this part, nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed. Okay, we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me. Tomorrow I will read From Conscious Incarnation.